1 month away from the start of the 2025 NFL Draft, and our prep here on Locked On Dolphins kicks into overdrive starting today.
You are Locked On Dolphins, your daily Miami Dolphins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, Miami, welcome to another episode of Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day here on the Locked On Network. I'm your host, Kyle Krabs, a lifelong Miami Dolphins fan, host of Locked On Dolphins, co-host of Locked On NFL Scouting, author of Touchdown Miami on Substack, and the NFL Draft lead for the 33rd team. I want to give a special welcome and shout out to our everydayers because it is your team every day. We don't just say it, we live it here on the Locked On Network. Today's episode of Locked On Dolphins is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Today on the show, we're getting, now we get free agency movement, we get player signings. We'll tackle that. I'm totally cool with that. We get about a month. And we got about a month for what is the pivotal talent infusion window for this football team in 2025. And it's a group that they got to get right. Let's be honest. For this team, if they're going to successfully compete through some transition, this is a class that needs to be competitive. It needs to be ready to play, and it needs to help address your needs while simultaneously not just going grocery list shopping. And that's why two of the names we're going to talk about here on today's show, as we kind of set the table for names to know in front of pick 13, are players that are not players at positions that you would typically associate to be positions of need, but they're players that can help change the identity of your offense and change your weaponry distribution and potentially free you to pivot away from any problematic wide receivers that wear a number that you can count on two hands, right? And we're going to get to everything. So we're going to do offensive. We're going to look at pick 13, and we're going to look at offensive linemen, defensive tackles, edge rushers, corners, safeties, everything that I think should be on the table. We're going to look at it throughout the course of this week here today on the show, and then we'll look at day two, and we'll have a really robust understanding of the draft class when it comes time for the Dolphins to make their picks. But I think the first thing you have to do, and I think this is what makes this class of draft picks very, very compelling. The Dolphins pick 13th. And if you asked me today, unquestionably, who is on the board and who is off the board when the Dolphins pick at 13, and how short is that list of players that you can just strike off and say, yeah, it's not going to happen, right? I don't know how long this list is because you can do mock drafts that have, and you saw it this past week, Shedeur Sanders is QB2 and he makes it to Pittsburgh at 21. You can do mock drafts that have Kenneth Grant, the defensive tackle from Michigan, sliding into the 30s. You saw that with both Daniel Jeremiah, and you saw that with Mel Kiper last week. And Kenneth Grant, for me, is a top half of the first round type of player who a lot of my mocks that I do for the 33rd team, he's off the board in the first 12 picks before Miami even gets on the board. Will Johnson, for the corner from Michigan, once upon a time was consensus top 5 player in the class. There's mock drafts that are getting put out by the state media for NFL.com and for ESPN that have this guy slide into the teens. So the list of guys, I think it's worth noting how short this list is, and it's a part of the unpredictable nature of this year's class that I think makes the Dolphins at 13. People are asking me a lot, who's your no trade out of list? Who's on that list for you of players that you just, if they're on the board, you can't move out? And the list, I think you have a better chance of having multiple players on that list that are still on the board at 13 than that list being completely exhausted just because of, is this a draft class that pushes teams to draft for need? Is this a draft class that causes teams to draft a running back and a tight end, or potentially 2 tight ends in the top 12 picks, or 2 running backs in the top 12 picks because of some of the unorthodox positional value that exists in this draft class? So I have a list. We'll get to it eventually. I don't want to do the whole month's worth of content here in the first 5 minutes of the first show for the draft deep dive this month. But the list of names that I have 5 names that I feel very confident all of them will be gone by the time the Dolphins come on the board. And anything else after that, you could talk me into being there. Cam Ward, quarterback, University of Miami. I think he goes number 1 to the Titans. That seems to be all the momentum. He has his pro day today. Obviously, the Titans have a very large representation that's going to be down there for that. They're picking number 1. They spent in free agency on offensive line. It's all coming up quarterback. And I think Cam Ward's going to be the pick. So I don't think you're going to have any chance, barring those snowballs down south, with a certain place freezing over, that Cam Ward's going to be on board at 13. Abdul Carter, my top 3 pick. Travis Hunter, I think, is a top 3 pick. Now, they might not go top 3, depending on what the Giants do. Do they sign Russell Wilson to go with Jameis Winston, and that's their veteran quarterback room? And they bypass a quarterback because they're a team that's in need of winning this year, or it's not going to matter what they do. Are the Browns going to draft a quarterback? If one of those teams does go quarterback, then yeah, you'll have the Patriots as a chance to catch either Abdul Carter or Travis Hunter at pick number 4. I think Armand Membu has become the consensus top offensive lineman in the class, and I think Mason Graham at defensive tackle is a really quote unquote safe player who has 3 down ability and the chance to play a lot of snaps. That's about as long as the list as I can get, where I would completely be stunned if any of those players was on the board at 13. Do I think it's probable that Shedeur Sanders is gone before pick 13? Yes, I do. I think whether it's the Jets or whether it's the Saints or whether it's the Giants or whether it's the Browns, I think there's enough stops along the way that I think it's unlikely that he ends up going. Do I think it's likely that Will Campbell, the offensive lineman from LSU, is completely open and shut? He's going to be there at 13? No, I think there's a pretty good chance he goes in the top 12. I think Dallas is a really good destination for him. You'll get another edge rusher in the top 12, but who is it and at what spot? Do you get multiple with Carolina and their needs on defense? The 49ers, the Cowboys, the Bears are a pass rush spot. So there's names that obviously you're going to have to fill in the other 7 names before the Dolphins get on the clock. But any of the 7 names that you might propose would be completely stone cold locks to be gone by pick 13. I just don't see. I've done enough mock drafts in this cycle for 30-13 that I think there's realistic scenarios that play out in which anybody other than Ward, Carter, Hunter, Membu, and Graham, I think there's a world and realm in which you live in where that player is gone. Now we're going to talk about Ashton, Jeanty, or we're going to talk about Tyler Warren. And these guys are not getting their own shows. We're going to stack them into this show because they're very unique players. They are, a lot of fans, I'm sure, would see the names and perceive them to be quote unquote luxury picks, especially for a team that needs the kind of trench investments that the Dolphins do. And that's why I would just like to, again, point out, we're going to get to all of it here on the show. We're going to explore every possible outcome. But my job with my platform and how I approach doing the content is to have you guys prepared for any decision the Dolphins can make. Whether that means drafting the best player available with air quotes, even if that means it's a running back, or drafting the best possible fit for the evolution of the offense if that means that it's Tyler Warren. So we have a lot to get into. We have a lot of names we're going to cover this week on the show. We're going to start with 2 at skill players for the rest of today's episode of Locked On Dolphins. So it's coming next. Make sure you guys stick with us. Have you ever check your bank account and wonder where the heck did all the money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, all at your fingertips. It's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You track all your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. When you start using Monarch, you might not realize how much that app on your phone with the food delivery service is taking out of each and every week that you have. Now, with Monarch, you can budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. The tournament is off and running this past weekend. March Madness is here. FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks. Use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who is cutting down the nets. If you've got your eye on a few underdogs this year, FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. And with tournament games almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. So let's do the thing. We're going to introduce and do our first player presentation here on the show. And it's Ashton, Jeanty, Boise State Broncos running back, 5'8" and change, 5'9", 215 pounds. True junior, has a lot of very lofty comparisons. Do I think it's probable that Ashton Jeanty's on the board at pick number 13? No, I don't. Full disclosure. But it's a running back, and positional value is a thing that exists. And if teams want to go trench heavy, you could very easily see the realm of possibility in which the Dolphins come on the board and Ashton Jeanty's there at pick 13. And if that's the case, he has a strong case to be made based on the players that would presumably go instead of him to be the best player on the board. I have my 3013 report up here, but I don't just want to read the bullet points off for you, but I do think it's worth setting the stage for who this player is. Elite contact balance and pad level, creates monstrous yards after contact. It's one of his most elite traits, is the ability to create missed tackles, create yardage for himself. And when you're a running back, right, that's the element of the position that I look at Devon Achane and I look at Raheem Mostert and those guys that are guys that have had good run after contact numbers in the last 2 years, respectively, most notably in 2023 in this Dolphins scheme. But a lot of that comes because they are running outside and guys get a piece of them when they're pressing the edge, but they don't make the tackle and then they get out in space. Jeanty's, how he earns his yards is a very different style than what the Dolphins have. It's worth noting that he also has very good vision. So I think for a zone-oriented scheme, there's a natural fit that would exist. And he has a lot of patience. And that's part of the zone concept ability, is how well do you press to the line of scrimmage, allow defenders to declare themselves, and allow your offensive linemen to pick them up when they choose a gap to commit to, and then cut off of your offensive linemen to make them right. Instinctually, he's one of the best players in the class. He has plus value on passing downs. I think there is a little bit more room to grow from a pass protection standpoint, but I think he's a big time. He would be a big time step up from Devon Achane. And remember, the Dolphins ran a lot of pony last year, and Jalen Wright exists. It's a significant investment the Dolphins made. They used a 2025 third-round pick to snap their fingers and Thanos get a fourth-round pick in last year's draft to draft Jalen Wright. I think there is a significant interest and investment there from the Dolphins to get the Jalen Wright pick to work. But depending on who's off the board, again, this could authentically be your best player available. A little bit more on Ashton Jeanty's production. 152 force missed tackles this season on 375 attempts. It's more than 1 out of every 3 carries there's a forced missed tackle. And he had 2,595 rushing yards and 29 rushing touchdowns this season, with 1,970 yards after contact. This was not a Boise State offensive line that was blowing the doors off of people. This was not a group. They played Penn State. They played Oregon. Jeanty put up monster numbers against Oregon. So if you're concerned about playing at Boise and level of competition, don't be. This is as clean of a projection as you could get. And he had about a 50-50 split on gap scheme versus zone scheme runs in 2023, which is a big step towards being a more appealing player for Miami, because that was not the case in 2023. He ran almost 2/3 gap scheme versus zone scheme, and it was nearly 50-50 split in 2024. He actually ran, 12 less zone runs than he did gap runs all season long. So the ability to create, the ability to have yardage that's not dependent upon your offensive line, I think is a big divide between what we saw with Raheem and what we saw with Devon Achane. And obviously, he was a big-time home run hitter, but he had to get out on the edge to hit those. And they tried to take Devon and play in between the tackles at times, and it just didn't work. And Jalen Wright is an element here that exists, and it's part of the potential deterrent. But I always say with like draft approach, don't allow good to prevent you from acquiring great. And I think Jalen Wright has a chance to be a good NFL running back. This is a great player. This is an elite player, Ashton Jeanty. And that's what the argument would be. I'm not justifying it because he wouldn't be my pick even if he was on the board. I have my own personalized Dolphins big board from the grades that I'm doing for all of these players. It's got like 225 names stacked on it right now. And there's enough names in front of Jeanty. I think he's 8th on my Dolphins specific board. And I'm pretty confident that there's 1 or 2 that are in front of him that are going to be there at 13. So I'm not advocating this is what the Dolphins need to do, but we are presenting the argument for taking that player in Ashton Jeanty. Ball security is a point of emphasis. 9 fumbles the last 2 seasons. Now that's come on almost 600 carries, but that's also a lot. That's a big time number. So that number needs to be reeled in a big time way. He's credited with hitting over 21 miles per hour in a live game setting, wearing pads. He is what I think is a transcendent player. He could fit in any kind of scheme. So if things don't work out long term beyond 2025, Ashton Jeanty on a rookie contract would perceivably be kind of a centerpiece type of player for wherever you moved on from here. And I think that's the hidden value if you added Ashton Jeanty. In my mind, if they were to justify making this pick, and if I were to justify this being the pick, not saying that it's what I would do. Don't get mad at me. It frees you up to use Devon Achane where I think more of his superpowers exist, which is being a playmaker in space. Obviously, hasn't dropped the pass in 2 years. Very good receiving profile. You can use him with your 21 back stuff and not ask him to be involved in the pass protection scheme, and you could flex him out in the slot, and you can continue to develop him as a guy who runs some more routes in the intermediate areas of the field, or put him on the perimeter and see if you get man coverage tells matched up against the linebacker and run go balls and shoot go balls to him. Like there's value in the passing game that I think Jeanty would allow if it frees up Achane to be less of a wear and tear type of player. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing, too, is as the Dolphins look to reclaim their run game successes of 2023 before the offensive line fell apart, having a player like this can help you reduce the wear and tear on your quarterback. And that's unfortunately a part of the reality that the Dolphins have to live in versus a lot of other teams, is being a more balanced offense benefits you because it takes additional risk away from the wear and tear of the quarterback. And then again, if you get to the end of 2025 and it doesn't work and there's a mass reset that comes, this is a very easy player to project into whatever your future looks like as an offense. And that's not why you make the pick, but it's not a bad consolation prize if you were to make the pick, if Ashton Jeanty were on the board at 13 and if the Dolphins chose him. Do I think it's likely? No, but we're doing our due diligence for all possible outcomes. Open your mind. That's what we're doing here on the show, which is why we're going to look at another skill player who's not of a marquee need for the Dolphins. Next, Tyler Warren. We'll do a deep dive on him that's coming your way here. Locked on Dolphins. Make sure you guys stick with us. So let's talk Tyler Warren, Penn State tight end, 6'5.5", 254 pounds, red shirt senior. Big time production this year as far as a massive breakout. Is often getting mocked in the Jets at 7 territory. But this is a player who the Dolphins added a player at wide tight end with Pharaoh Brown. But Pharaoh Brown is on a 1-year deal. I don't think there's a lot of long-term, and there's no proof of concept in the offense. So if you're just being completely objective, it helps you sleep better at night to say we added a player who I think can be, like if Julian Hill ever developed into the best version of himself, he'd probably look a lot like Pharaoh Brown. So you'd say, okay, I could rest a little easy knowing that you have a player who fortifies the floor of that particular role within the offense, but it's not a mismatch type of player, right? You know, Pharaoh Brown's not really involved in the pass game. He had an awesome interview with Travis Wingfield as part of his introduction for the free agency content, and he came out right and said, if I don't catch a ball all year, but I'm the best blocking tight end in football and the best inline wide player in football, I'm going to be happy because those are the goals that they have for me here. Man, you want to get my juices flowing. You know, Pharaoh Brown sitting here talking about, I don't care about catching the football. I want to block somebody. That gets me going. But it's worth noting that I don't know how much of a long-term solution that is to a potential X factor player that could exist within the ecosystem the Dolphins have created. Enter Tyler Warren, hypothetically. This is the look at what the decision would look like. Tyler Warren, multi-sport athlete in high school, lettered in basketball, baseball, was a 3-star recruit in football. He played quarterback. He played a lot of things, honestly, as a quarter at the high school level. There's direct snap package that Penn State has gone back to and used from him to time. And I think a lot of that is very evident when you see him as just an athlete with the ball in his hands. The positives, massive frames results in success in 50-50 catch situations. This past year, he converted 13 of 21 contested catch opportunities. And he's at almost 65% for his career in contested catch opportunities, 21 of 33 for the entirety of his career. And he's only had 1 interception on targets thrown in his direction across the entirety of his career at Penn State, over 200 targets. So that's the body and the catch radius presence that he has and how well he plays around contact. Surprisingly nimble and dynamic after the catch, earns added yardage by forcing missed tackles in space. Missed tackles this year. He had 19 forced missed tackles as a tight end this season, which I think is probably, man, I'm going to hate to do it to him like this, but I am going to do it. I'm going to look up Mike Gesicki's missed tackles numbers. And there's a chance Tyler Warren, as this year's missed tackle tight end, has forced more missed tackles than Gesicki's forced in his entire career. I want to see. So let's see. Receiving. No shade at Mike. It's fine. Yeah, it's true. That's a factual statement. Mike Gesicki came in the league in 2018. It's the year 2025, and Mike Gesicki, in that amount of time, with, let's see, 327 catches to his name and almost 500 targets to his name as a pro. 14 missed tackles since 2018 for Mike Gesicki. Tyler Warren forced 19 this past year on 135 targets for Penn State. So you see it on film, though. You see the creativity. You see there's surprising wiggle. He can go over guys. He can run through guys. He can use power. And then there's a functionally stout build here that allows him to play well on the edges of the core when sealing down or stepping up on the second level players. I think there's still a lot of growth for him as an inline player that has to come. But if you're going to go super heavy, and I would not be adverse to some 13 personnel for the Dolphins as well, especially if they're going to revitalize the balance of their offense and have competent ability to run the ball. And whether that's Tyler Warren or that's a guy on day 2 because you're using a first-round pick on an offensive lineman or you're using a day 2 pick on an offensive lineman, however those jigsaw pieces fit together. 13, I would not be mad about seeing some 13 personnel. because that's, when you think about Kansas City and some of their successful playoff runs down the stretch, they had a lot of tight ends that could do multiple things. And that's part of the argument for a Tyler Warren, with the presence of a Pharaoh Brown, but also the presence of a Jonnu Smith as a volume pass catcher who can line up in the slot. Now, I do think what's interesting with Tyler Warren, I thought he stabilized his blocking down the stretch. I thought he was a better blocking player in the playoff and in the conference championship game against Oregon than what he was for a lot of the earlier portions of the season. But there's plenty of growth to be had here. But on passing downs, even this past year, he spent more of his passing down opportunities in the slot and as a flexed player than he did as an inline player. He had 33% of his snaps this year on passing downs came as an inline hand in the dirt type player versus 47% in the slot. So the other question you have to ask yourself is, you have Jonnu Smith in a contract year. Are you going to extend Jonnu Smith? How long-term are you in confidence that Jonnu Smith's going to be the player that he was for you last year? Was it an aberration? Are you interested in a more versatile long-term? Like that, it's not the most direct application of what this Dolphins roster needs right now. There's no question about that. But your answers at the other position parts and pieces and individual dynamics in the room, as of right now, are short-term answers. And you have a potential long-term answer with Tyler Warren, who can potentially answer both problems as the flex receiving player and the inline player all in one body, which then creates a lot more flexibility for the rest of the room. That would be the argument in the case for a Tyler Warren. Quick synopsis on Tyler Warren from the player profile that I had put together for the 3013. This is not tailored for the Dolphins, but we'll get into a lot of the tailored grades a little closer to the draft as far as like a big board and rankings. And then we'll get the horizontal draft board over up on Touchdown Miami with the Substack, where it's laid out like an NFL team puts together their draft board, and that'll be with the Dolphins specific grades. So there's a lot of good draft stuff in the next month that you guys have to look forward to. Warren projects as a F tight end at the NFL level immediately. He's currently at his best detached from the core, utilized as a blocker against safeties, linebackers, and corners. He's a capable split flow player and offers the necessary raw strength to play in line. His blocking posture, punch placement, and center gravity show room for growth when charged as playing as a wide tight end. In the meantime, Warren can thrive short-term as an underneath zone buster and red zone target capable of adding created yardage with the ball in his hands. 12 personnel and hybrid 21 personnel teams will find his versatility over attractive in their bid to generate mismatches all over the field. Is he there? Maybe. I think, and depending on if the Dolphins get Calais Campbell back in the next month. If the Dolphins get Calais Campbell back in the next month and they, if they're able to secure another insurance policy for the offensive line that they feel good about, I think that really opens up, all bets are off as far as what direction they go, because they can play a long-term game. And what they did in free agency this year is play a long-term game. They didn't give out a bunch of long-term contracts, but they're not just focused on 2025 and got the blinders on because we got to win this year, else we're going to be out of a job. Like, they're not operating that way as much as it was assumed that they would. They're operating with the long-term health and benefits simultaneously while trying to field a competitive roster short-term. And that's a part of the cyclical beast that they've had to go through. So I think that makes Tyler Warren a really compelling, interesting, circumstantial, specific type of fit for the team. How heavy do you want to lean into two tight end stuff? Does a player like this give you enough big body types that you can lean into the run game, and then you could potentially move on from Tyreek Hill if you get a good offer that you feel good about before you're in you have to get off the pot here when he's due $53 million in cap space, and that's untenable, and it's $35 million in non-guaranteed cash that you're just going to move on from. There's a lot of layers to this, which makes it hard, which is why we have to explore so many options. And I thought a running back and a tight end, There's not a lot of other names that are worth consideration in my mind for 13. So I'll just bundle these guys together in the introductory kind of kickoff show with really, I think, good talents at their respective positions that can be universal fits long term. Going to look at some more draft prospects for 13 overall. That's coming your way next tomorrow on the show. So keep it locked in right here on Locked On Dolphins. It is your team every day. Appreciate you guys as always for checking out Locked On Dolphins. I'll talk to you all again soon. Go Fins.